So I am going to talk about aphantasia. Aphantasia is the inability to be able to the inability to, well, it's not necessarily inability. It's a different variation of seeing in the mind's eye. So I'm gonna try to break it down and expand beyond the, I guess, general ways in which aphantasia has been, I guess, packaged. Not necessarily generally, but maybe like from the things that I've seen, maybe on social media, for example. So aphantasia is, so I'm gonna give an example, the classic example of an apple, right? When people are explaining aphantasia, they say, imagine an apple. If you see an apple in your mind, the way you would see an apple in front of you, that would mean that you have levels of aphantasia, because aphantasia is phantasmal, and phantasmal is like fantasy, right? So imagery, imagination, right? So they say that if you can see an apple or an object, so I've asked people if they can see apples in their mind, and some people have told me that they've seen apples, and I asked them to describe to me the way that they see the apple. So sometimes people have said, I saw an apple and it was red. I saw an apple and it was green. I saw an apple and it was sliced. I saw an apple but there was a knife and it was on a table or a wooden whatever. So they're able to imagine it in three-dimensional form. And it's not usually just the apple. The apple is in a space that they can also see being in. So those are the people with levels of aphantasia. I don't want to say that they have hyperphantasia, because aphantasia is it's like a scale, right? It's a scale. So if they can, see the apple properly, like they will see in reality with whatever land, I'm going to use the word landscape, even though landscape is, outside and stuff, but the landscape of where this I was gonna say apple because my Nigerianness was gonna come out there. So what did I say? I don't know what I was saying. Was it apple? I don't know what I was gonna say. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so the landscape of where this apple happens to be, right? So the potentiality of them filling in the blanks to give like a picture, like to render a picture that it would be like you're looking at the world as it is now, right? That would be the higher phantasias, up to moving away from aphantasia to hyperphantasia, right? So those who have aphantasia, they are not able to we are, because I have aphantasia also, so not able to conceptualize, not able to, when I say conceptualize, I am using conceptualize because I tend to conceptualize as imagination, so I'm prone to using that word. But they're not able to visualize the apple as it would be in reality. Like the definition of the color, like you're seeing it here in the physical. At least that's what I understand. So when I think of an apple, or when many people who have aphantasia think of apples or objects, they think of the idea of it from the memory of what they know that it is. So it's kind of like, if I wanted to specifically think of an apple on the table, I could think of an apple on the table. I'm not going to see it, but I'm going to think of it. And the me thinking of it is me imagining it, me conceptualizing what an apple on the table would be. I'm conceptualizing that if something is going to be on the table, obviously it has contact. It sounds obvious, but I'm going to place it this way, Is that useful? Is that helpful? It doesn't matter if it's helpful or not. It was the way that I could conceptualize it. So the thing with aphantasia now is that it extends beyond. I feel like I didn't explain so much. So it's like, yeah, so you can conceptualize things. You can't necessarily, yeah, imagine them the way they will be in reality. But this aphantasia, this mind's eye, does not only, it's not only about sight, right? It's not only whether you can see something. It extends to all the other senses. So eyes, smell, sound, feeling. So I put some things down here just so. Taste, right? So the people who have, what is it called? Aphantasia. Depends on whether they have total aphantasia or they have like a medium level aphantasia. So again, it goes on a scale. So there are some people who are completely and totally mentally blind, right? Mentally blind in the way that mentally blind in a definition aspect, in tangibility and realness of how it seems in comparative to reality. So aphantasia again extends to all the senses that I said. So when you have total aphantasia, so not only can you not see an apple, you cannot imagine a sound, and imagine a sound the way you would have heard it in reality. You cannot imagine, say for example, the sound of your own, what is it called? Mother's voice or your father's voice, or how a dog is gonna bark, whatever. You can't imagine taste. So you cannot imagine how an apple would taste like, or an orange would taste like. You cannot feel it in your mind, right? And the imagination of voice is kind of different to your own inner voice, because when you're imagining somebody else's voice, obviously somebody else's voice that you're imagining, but when it's your own inner voice, it's kind of like you're speaking to yourself in your mind with a voice, an audible voice in your mind's eye, right? Those who are able to do all of those things will be classified under the field of hyperphantasia, right? And with hyperphantasia, people can also they can also project images, right? So I was having a conversation with two people, and one of them said that, for example, if they're looking out in a room, and I've also seen people talking about the same thing, when I was reading up on people's experiences, that they can project an image outwards from their mind, in the sense of, so if they wanted to rearrange their room, right, they can imagine a red chair there, so they can flip around their room like in their mind and project that image as though they were seeing that outside, right? So for example, no, dismiss my example, but people with aphantasia, they're not able to, at least hyperphantasia in the imagery sense, because that's the aspect that kind of projection is going to be using. So they're not able to do things like this. So maybe they can imagine taste, but they cannot imagine sound, or maybe they can imagine what is it called? I want to talk about the feeling part, but I feel like the sense of feeling is a bit more complex, and it definitely would take some time and appropriate language to properly conceptualize this. But so, and with the not with the incomplete aphantasia, some people might be able to see, for example, a gray apple, or maybe they will see the shape of the apple in their mind, right? There's some kind of definition there, but it would not be colored, or it would be kind of blurred. And I am going to imagine, although I have not yet tried to research that correlation, but there's a probability that if somebody with that kind of aphantasia can see some definition, that maybe the same thing goes with the imagination of the voice, imagination of the taste of an apple. Maybe then that what is it called? That sense would also be kind of in the gray area of whatever imagining voice is, in a gray area, right? So there is that. Okay, so now that I've said that, what do I want to talk about further? Okay, so there are a few things, so I'm just gonna focus on some things. Actually, no, I'm gonna talk about the clears. So I'm gonna get slightly metaphysical here. So I mean, if one is, into, metaphysical, esoteric, or whatever word you want to use to qualify it, intuition, beyond the senses, right? Because the beyond of the senses also come through the same channel of the initial senses, right? It's going to be using the same faculty because imagery, sound, taste, all of these things we can imagine them as structures or forms, right? So if something is going to come through, it's going to pass through the channel that it can come through from. So in terms of clays, right, there are different types of clays. I don't know what the names are, but I mean, I know some of them. So there is the clairvoyant. The clairvoyant, I mean, when I'm thinking clairvoyant, I'm thinking forward, right? Like it's associated with be able to see visions. For example, when people say, oh, I had a vision, So for me, it was kind of a bit, I mean, I just kind of thought, okay, people be having visions, you know what I mean? But before I knew that I had aphantasia, I mean, I had an idea of something. I just, I didn't know what is it called, like other comparative examples of what visual seeing was. Or I mean, people did tell me things, but for me, I just kind of thought, well, there's like a scale of ways of doing these things. So I'm just gonna leave that train of thought there because I don't want to engage further because it's gonna shift me around and I don't really want to feel too shifted around. So I'm gonna go back to the clear. So clairvoyance, seeing. But yeah, like I was saying, when I think of clairvoyance, it feels like voyage, voyeur, to look at. I mean, voyeurism is like watching people do things, like things that maybe you probably should not be looking at people doing, like in intimate spaces or in taboo things. So a voyeur be somebody who watches their neighbors, with like a telescope or whatever. I mean, it's kind of giving stalker, but I don't know if that has an etymological link. But voyeur, to look at maybe something you should not potentially see. So in clairvoyance is like being given sight to access beyond your proximal space. So I was watching a video that I did again, and when I got to clairvoyance, because I was making associated mechanisms with like voyage or voyeur, and looking at things you shouldn't be seeing, but then I remember that French voir is to see, right? Je vois, right? It is to see, I believe. So now I'm kind of doubting myself. But I'm pretty sure is je vois, I see. Je vois, I see. So clairvoyance, but I guess like voyeur also kind of came with, probably expanded through the idea of to voir, to see. But I don't think that necessarily deters from the example that I said, because it's a structural feeling of example. It feels like that structurally. So somehow there is an essence that gives me travel, travel far. Also, I mean, voyage, obviously, but there's some kind of like, I don't know, I'm gonna make up a word now, a semantical mechanical similarity or something like, I know what I mean. So if it yeah, take it how it sounds. Right, so people who are seeing visions, who are experiencing clairvoyance, right, they might get things from, I guess, the past, or things that might point at the future, or things that might point outside of time, outside of the proximal dimension. Let's say it that way, right? So people who have hyperphantasia will possibly be able to have, I'm not saying that it's like like a total correlation, because psychic or intuitive, all these kind of things, there's so many variables to everything, let's say in that way. So I said clairvoyance. There is the clear I was thinking claircognizance, clairsentience, but this is not necessarily this is more likely to be found at least at a higher level in people with aphantasia, but I'm not gonna get into that right now. I'm just gonna talk about the other clears, just to kind of give myself a bit of structure here. So because I didn't write down the names of the other clears, the ones that I don't know, but there is the clear of the voice, right? So the clear audience, that's what it is. So clear audience, for example, so you're able to hear beyond what you can hear, right? So for example, you can hear in your imagination, in your mind's eye, somebody saying something, or I don't know. I think these are the people who are able to, for example, they say that they have conversations with maybe their guides, or they can hear visibly their guides communicating with them, or people who speak with extraterrestrial beings, you know. So I mean, I have not spoken to an extraterrestrial being in my waking reality, at least, right? Because this is being able to do it whilst you're here. Because there is also a capability of doing certain things. I'm gonna make it more complicated, but I'm gonna try here. I'm trying to control a lot my deviation. Right, so in the physical, here, not when you're sleeping, not when you're half asleep, right? I mean, when you're sleeping, when you're half asleep, can also be synonymous, or at least in the same sphere as when you're taking psychedelics, or when you're in trance state. So very Neptunian ways. And when I say Neptunian, I mean like the realm of not complete rationality, not complete structure, as opposed to Saturnian. Saturn is the governor of structure, of definition, of boxing principles, right? So our waking reality, when you're completely sober, when you're not in trance state, when you're not in flow state, you're more of a, you're working very rational. What you see is what you get. But when you're away from that sphere, you're getting more than you're seeing. When you're in extreme flow state, super hyper focused, right? You're using, like, you're tapping into something, right? This flow, this where things can be more bendy. So it's the realm of, it's the same kind of, like, I mean, it's not the same, but similar structure to when you're sleeping, or when you're in between sleeping, when you're in liminal spaces, when things can, let's say, like, you're like a membrane, right? You're a membrane, you're something, a membrane, yeah. And you have like more holes in your membrane, right? So when you're in flow state, or when you're in dream state, or when you're in trance state, you have more holes, right? So let's say things are able to flow more, but you're steady in a way. You can also be unsteady. You know what? Let's just leave that. So when I'm talking about these clears, right? I'm talking about them in the more I feel like no. I'm talking about them in more structured sense, whilst acknowledging that they extend beyond the structured sense. For example, people who are walking around, walking down the street, or sitting down in their room, or doing whatever it is, they can just get, they can just still get that voice situation that could be cumulated upon, that could expand the more they go towards what I said about the Neptunian side. right? And the same will go for taste. Maybe you're tasting something, you taste something, and then maybe like later on in the day you eat the same thing. I don't know. Or you're tasting something and I don't know that. So I didn't press play. Yeah, I said that I was gonna have a wild example, but I don't want to go there. And that, going back to the point. Okay, anyway, going back to the point. So these clears that I mentioned, right? They're gonna come through the channels of the channels that are there for them to grasp, right? So with aphantasia now, it gets it's different, right? Because if you don't have the ability to see things as they are, it's less likely, most unlikely that you're gonna have these kind of senses, right? I'm not saying that this is like 100% what is it called, foolproof situation. But if you're a total aphantasia, it's very, very unlikely for you to, at least in the conventional way of the hyperphantasia. It's not that you cannot see. I, as somebody who has aphantasia and who has experienced something that I will, before I say this, I would say that, when people are experiencing these clears, perhaps they don't know the concept of clears. Maybe they're not into metaphysical, esoteric. Maybe they're very, world rational, or maybe they have, I don't know, their own different ways, because there's so many different ways of understanding the mind, understanding experience beyond Western language, right? Beyond, for example, I'm using English, right? Maybe in some other indigenous cultures or communities or whatever, they have so many different ways of qualifying these things, because words are qualifiers, right? Words are simply just that, to point a finger at something that you see. See, something that you experience, something that you note down, right? That's what language is. So there's a potential that somebody who's not aware of this clears and not aware of the idea of inner speech and the differentiations of how their mind's eye is categorized or organized might just see everything like a soup. They're just like, yeah, just that's how my mind works. They're not really differentiating, or they don't have the language for differentiation and categorization. Before I had the language of aphantasia, I was just kind of like, my mind is my mind. And people are like, why are you always talking about your mind? I was like, but there's something weird here, weird, just slightly, not different, a different dress, different shoes, different hats, different cows. I don't know why I'm saying cows. This is one of my intrusive thoughts. Cows just keep coming to my mind. I'm like, sign, cows. Give me a sign, cows, fucking cows. Podcast didn't really do anything to me. Anyway, so with aphantasia, just reverting back to what I said before I deviated, it's like, so your clear would be maybe more clear cognizance or clear sentience, and in this, what is it called? Clear cognizance is about just instant knowing, right? But I have a bit of a problem, not a problem, a bit of a quarrel with this idea of instant knowing or clear knowing, because clear knowing, like to clearly know, it's like accumulation of many things interacting, and in my experience, I've been able to see the clear knowing, like see the mechanisms of the clear knowing. But then explaining the mechanisms of clear knowing will require quite a lot of words to paint the same picture. But yeah, so aphantasias would not really be having the clairvoyance, clairaudience, if they're total, if they have some sort of if they're more a bit away from the complete aphantasia, so their clairs must emulate the kinds of levels of their phantasma, the ability to imagine across sound, voice, blah blah blah. However, there are instances where this where it can get a bit more complicated, um, where you can still see, but I mean, in my experience, this is when you enter into the more Neptunian state. So it's like your aphantasia, those senses that you have would be heightened, but yeah, when you get into the, I'm repeating myself, Neptunian states, more formless-ish states, not stable form, like sleep or being on a substance. For example, with cannabis, that's my experience. I've taken truffles twice. So I don't know experiences with other types of mind altering substances, but I mean, when I would smoke more in the past, now I don't smoke as much, or like the quantity, not as much, but I had experiences where I was able to speak to myself in my mind with my mother's voice, my auntie's voice. I was like compulsively switching between everybody's voice, and anybody that I thought about, their voice would echo in my mind, and I would talk to myself in their voice. And I thought that that was the weirdest. I think though I experienced a bit of a, let's use the psychosis in that moment, you know, or like a bad trip. I don't know what you want to call it, but in those moments, I was able to experience what's the, I mean, those that was like, I don't know, 3 years ago. So before I knew about aphantasia. So in that sense, you know, one is able to cross the threshold when your mind, because when you're in altered states of consciousness, right, it's not only your mind, it's your mind and everything else, because the mind is like a channel of bringing things from, it's like it's like a threshold guardian of the ineffability of consciousness into the material reality. It's the playground. So the mind is like a vacuum, but a vacuum is spaceless, right? I mean, it's full of space. But if you look at an infinite vacuum, right? It's like you can't really conceptualize how much space there is. So that is kind of like what the mind feels like, right? So the things that, so when you're aphantasic, right, it's not that the things are not there. They are there. It's just that they don't have definition. So it's like you're seeing something that I saw somebody using the same example. It was not the example that I was using, so I'm borrowing the example of a monitor that's working, but it's black, but it's working. So for example, somebody who's like blind, for example, or I don't know if that's the, now I'm politically thinking about the term, but I don't think that if you're blind, it's, you know, it's not a strange word or anything. So it's like you're navigating in the dark. So you have sight in the dark, and it just means that I guess there is a bit of flexibility somehow, and I know that seems counter. It seems intuitive. It seems like it seems like that would not be the case, but it is the case. But maybe I feel like I should write things down that I should probably expand on another time, but I can watch my video again. I write it down. And this is getting to like fucking 30 minutes long because I'm really into this. But I'm finally, you know, getting myself to start doing this. So anyway, so when I was in that state, I was able to have that experience, and I just literally thought my mind was broken because I didn't know that it was a thing that was possible. So in that sense, people are able to. With psychedelics, I don't know, because I tried a little bit of truffles, just a little bit, and I didn't experience anything like that. I could not see. I could not hear, but in the way that my mind the way that my mind was working in that particular moment, in the work that I did to, I don't know, to understand or to evolve my mind and familiarize myself with the mechanisms, that system of seeing in the dark was enhanced on truffles, I mean, right? So it was not so much that I could see more or hear more. I mean, I could do the clear sentience and the clear cognizance better. Let's just say that. No, not clear cognizance, because I'm not talking about clear here. No, sorry. I could I could, what is it called, metacognitize, let's just say, more in that moment, right? And there'd been states where I've been able to see things in my mind, like see things in my mind, like I would see them in close to how I would see them in reality, but never. Like I was able to, for example, I don't know why this always happens. Like seeing a Vietnamese man, it's not always happened twice, but I could see a Vietnamese man. I could see a scene. It wasn't like I would see it in reality, but it would be like I would see it in a dream. So that happened, more, when I don't remember what kind of mental state that I was in, and it wasn't that much of, cannabis. And for those who smoke, I'm just gonna have to give you like, for example, if I'm gonna smoke, I'm gonna smoke this, literally, this amount, and it could have an effect on me, like a giant effect on me. That's why I don't smoke that much. But it depends on my mental state. There's so many different variations of mental states that could influence, right? These kind of Neptunian states. But I was able to, and I was able to have more definition to my, what is it called, to my senses, right, in the mind's eye. Because what these kind of substances do is, again, they expand the vacuum of the mind. So they scatter things. I would say that they rearrange or reorganize, or they cross thresholds that then bring some kind of light, right, into this darkness that you're trying to feel through. But it's not necessarily comfortable, because that's not your baseline, right? If you're away from your baseline in any scenario, you're gonna be fucking terrified, because you're just like, what the fuck is that? And there have been several scenarios that this has happened, and I really do enjoy it. I really, really, really do enjoy. I know I'm saying I really, really do enjoy, and I don't even know how I'm going to explain what it is that I'm enjoying. But just the mechanisms and the way all these things manifest and interact, and like once when I was with my ex, that I was not with for a while, we kind of started seeing each other again, and I started smoking after not smoking for 2 months. And from my experiences with her, the feelings that I was having, her personality in that moment, her personality in general, my personality, puts me into this almost visual, semi-visual imagery within my mind. But because the aphantasic is conceptually well versed, so it's like you're using the conceptual part to imagine. And I'm not saying that hyperphantasia, like hyperphantasia also works with conceptualizing, but in a different state, because anyway, all these things are kind of metaphor, right? There, if we're gonna go beyond, all forms exist in they find vessels to cohesize themselves. So they take different forms of things and join them together, and use a bigger vessel to carry it. So that's what metaphor does. Metaphor carries things, right? It carries things within, like, it's like a Russian doll in a way, right? So it can mean very, it gives it flexibility of meaning, right? So lots of the forms that exist within it can metamorphose, right? And they can be accounted for in that sense. I'm gonna ignore that part. Joyfully, lovingly, I love you, but move away to the side in this moment, please. So I was accumulating our experiences, and in that moment, with our past or whatever, and I saw ourselves. Obviously, I cannot explain it as I would have felt it in that moment, because I'm only recalling it, right? So the definition, like the qualia, right? Qualia is the exact subjective experience, the exact subjective everything, really, like down to the T, I mean, you can never really necessarily really go down to the T of things, but the highest level of concentration of the subjective experience in that moment. So I cannot replicate that across all the sensations that I felt them through. But I remember thinking, we're like on the hunter gatherers. I felt us in like a cave, this accumulating the things that I mentioned in a cave, and the one who goes out in the morning and the one who goes out at night, the one who holds the stick this way, the one who holds the stick that way, the one, it was so like, and she was just like, what the but she was kind of used to me. But for me, I was thinking, okay, am I weird for thinking like this? Obviously, I cannot replicate what I said in that moment, but it was very, now I understand, a bit more. I mean, somewhere anyway, somewhere deep down, somewhere in the dark, that, yeah, so what was I saying? Yeah, I guess this was with substances, right? Because I smoked with her and she smokes big amount. And I think in that moment I was still smoking a bit, more, slightly more than I would now. So, yeah, I feel like I'm now going really all over the place. And there's just, I mean, one could talk about all of these things really a long time. So I might have to maybe stop there for now and come back another time.